Self-development with tactics. So, let us have a look on book 3 and apparently also book 4, book 5, book 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, well, we are probably going to finish up with this one today. So, yeah, let me see. Book 3, The Preconditions of Virtue. Dying to avoid poverty or erotic passion or something painful is proper to a coward, not to a brave person. For shrinking burns is softness, and such a person stands firm in the face of death to avoid an evil, not because standing firm is fine. Book 4. And by the way, this is what I don't necessarily like about Stoicism, that they do consider suicide being sensical in some ways. And I've always thought about it in that way, in a way of, okay, something isn't fine and I'm not able to deal with something, and so I'm just gonna kill myself, and I don't necessarily think that this is a way of the strongest or the way of the, of the person with the most willpower, essentially. Book 5, Justice. But doing acts of cowardice or injustice is not doing these actions, except coincidentally it is being a certain state. It's being in a certain state when we do them. Similarly, practicing medicine or healing is not cutting or not cutting, giving drugs or not giving them, but doing all these things in a certain way. There are these capacities in the soul, sense, perception, and understanding, desire, that control action and truth. So sense, perception, understanding, and desire, and they control actions and the truth. What we consider being the truth and what we think what we should do, essentially our actions. They're not coming from somewhere, but either subconsciously or consciously, there are decisions that we make and thoughts that we have that lead to those actions that we have, and essentially as well, and as correctly as Aristotle points it out, didn't expect anything else, by the way, this is then also going to be our truth, our opinions and values, which in the end create truth, I'd say. Anyway, book 6, Virtues or Thought. As assertion and denial are to tough, so pursuit and avoidance are to desire. Now virtue of character is a state that decides, and decision is a deliberative desire. If then the decision is excellent, the reason must be true and the desire correct, so that what reason asserts is what desire pursues. Further, every science seems to be teachable, and what is scientifically knowledgeable is learnable. But all teaching is from what is already known, as we also say in the analytics. For some teaching is through induction, some by deduction. Young people then, lacking experience, have no real conviction in these other sciences, but only say the words, whereas the nature of mathematical objects is clear to them. Book 7, Incontinence. And I still consider it being the fact that you piss yourself. Anyway, let us now make a new start and say that there are 3 conditions of character to be avoided. Vice or vice, incontinence, and bestiality. The contraries of 2 of these are clear. We call one virtue and the other continence. It might also be the case that I'm pronouncing it the wrong way then. Well, the contrary to bestiality is most suitably called virtue superior to us, a heroic, indeed divine sort of virtue. Moreover, someone is not prudent simply by knowing. He must also act on his knowledge. But the incontinent person does not. He is not on the condition of someone who knows and is attending to his knowledge as he would have to be if he were prudent, but in the condition of one asleep or drunk. Yeah, makes sense, especially if you think about the fact that when someone is drunk, or when you are drunk or asleep, well, yeah, it depends on what kind of a sleep, but when you're drunk, you're probably not going to make the best decision. So being drunk is probably one of the worst states you can be in. First of all, in terms of well-being for the long term, and second of all, for all the consequences that you're probably going to get yourself in. Some maintain, on the contrary, that we are happy when we are broken on the wheel or fall into terrible misfortunes, provided that we are good. Whether they mean to or not, these people are talking nonsense. Not so subtle jab at Stoic ideas from Socrates. Actual Stoicism was founded 100 years later. Not so subtle subtle jab at Stoic ideas from Socrates. Well, I want to repeat it. Some maintain, on the contrary, that we are happy when we are broken on the wheel or fall into terrible misfortunes, provided that we are good. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is what Stoicism means, is happiness, but still being happy even in these cases, and seeing things in a good way and so on and so forth, and not necessarily trying to get you into trouble and trying to get you into situations that most people don't want to be in. I don't think that this is what Stoicism is about. Book 8, Friendship. Hence, friendship has 3 species, corresponding to 3 objects of love. For each object of love has a corresponding type of mutual loving combined with awareness of it. But complete friendship is the friendship of good people similar in virtue, for they wish good in the same way to each other insofar as they are good, and they are good in their own right. Book 9. For it is said that we must love most the friends who is most a friend. That we love most the friend who is most a friend, and one person is a friend to another most of all, if he wishes good to the other for the other's sakes. And I do want to underline, for the other's sake, even if no one will know about it. But these are features, most of all, of one's relation to oneself, and so too are all the other defining features of a friend, since we have said that all the features of friendship extend from oneself to others. Book 10, Pleasure. Gonna be interesting. To those who cite the disgraceful pleasures to show that pleasure is not a good, we might reply that these sources of disgraceful pleasures are not pleasant. If things are pleasant to people in bad condition, we should not suppose that they are also pleasant except to those people. We might say that pleasure are choice-worthy, but not if they come from these sources, just as wealth is desirable, but not if you have to betray someone to get it, and health is desirable, but not if it requires you to eat anything and everything. Or perhaps pleasures are different in species, for those from fine sources are different from those from shameful sources, and we cannot have the just person's pleasure without being just, any more than we can have the musicians without being musicians. And so the musicians are pleasure. And similarly in the other cases. And no one would choose to live with a child's level of thought for this whole life, taking as much pleasure as possible in what pleases children, or to enjoy himself while doing some utterly shameful action, even if he would never suffer pain for it. Moreover, there are many things that we would be eager for even if they brought no pleasure. For instance, seeing, remembering, knowing, having the virtues, even if pleasures necessarily follow on them, that does not matter, for we could choose them even if no pleasure resulted from them. Yeah, because we are anyway going to do that. We're anyway going to see and then remember and know. It would seem to be clear then that pleasure is not the good, that not every pleasure is choice-worthy, and that some are choice-worthy in themselves, differing in species or in their sources from those that are not. But what about those pleasures that seem to be decent? Of those, which kind or which particular pleasure should we take to be the pleasure of a human being? Surely it will be clear from the activities, since the pleasures are consequences of these. Hence, the pleasures that complete the activities of the complete and blessedly happy man Whether he has one activity or more than one will be called the fully human pleasures to the fullest extent, and the other pleasures will be human in secondary or even more remote ways corresponding to the character of the activities. Happiness is not a state, for if it were, someone might have it and yet be asleep for his whole life, living the life of a plant, or suffer the greatest misfortunes. If we do not approve of this, we count happiness as an activity rather than a state, as we said before. We should count happiness as one of those activities that are choice-worthy in their own right, not as one of those choice-worthy for some other end. For happiness lacks nothing but is self-sufficient. As we have often said, then, what is honorable and pleasant is what is so the excellent person, and what is so to the excellent person. To each type of person, the activity that accords with his own proper state is most choice-worthy. Hence, the activity in accord with virtue is most choice-worthy to the excellent person, and hence is most honorable and pleasant. Happiness then is not found in amusement, for it would be absurd if the end were amusement, and our lifelong efforts and sufferings aimed at amusing ourselves. Yeah, totally the case. I mean, this is not what we do. This is not what anybody does. Well, I don't want to say anybody because there's probably going to be somebody. Way too many people. I know the chances are way too big. But, yeah. Relaxation then is not the end for. We pursue it to prepare for activity. Yes. And I think it is important. Relaxation and rest is there to prepare for activity. Which means that you also need it. It is a crucial part of life. Meaning that you can't work all the time. But I do want to point out rest might mean something different to you than it does to me. Well, but the happy life seems to be a life in accord with virtue, which is a life involving serious actions and not consisting in amusement. Then, if someone is alive and action is excluded and production even more, what is left but study? Hence, the God's activity that is superior in blessedness will be an activity of study, and so the human activity that is most akin to the God's activity will, more than any others, have the character of happiness. A sign of this is the fact that other animals have no share in happiness, being completely deprived of this activity of study. But happiness will need external prosperity also, since we are human beings, for our nature is not self-sufficient for study, but we need a healthy body and need to have food and other services provided. Still, even though no one can be blessedly happy without external goods, we must not think that to be happy we will need many large goods. For self-sufficiency and actions do not depend on excess. Well, I do want to say that, of course, with our food and with a very small amount of goods, you're probably not going to be happy and you're probably not going to have that of a decent life. But as he points out correctly, we don't need a Ferrari. We don't need that big house. Often I would actually say that initially we think that this is going to make us happy, but in the end it's actually going to make us even more unhappy, because with things there come a lot of other things, If you have a big house, then, well, probably have to get a mate or somebody that is cleaning it, You're probably not going to do it yourself. If you have a big house, there's going to be insurance, and so on and so forth. It is best then, clearly all this is true of the wise person more than anyone else, hence he is most loved by the gods, and it is likely that the same person will be happiest, hence, by this argument also the wise person more than anyone else will be happy. It is best then if the community attends to upbringing and attends correctly. But if the community neglects it, it seems fitting for each individual to promote the virtue of his children and his friends, to be able to do it or at least to decide to do it. Further education adapted to an individual is actually better than a common education for everyone, just as individualized medical treatment is better. You don't say, Fun fact, we're still doing it in the common way. First then, let us try to review any sound remarks our predecessors have made on particular topics. Then let us study to collect political systems to see from them what sorts of things preserve and destroy cities and political systems of different types, and what causes some cities to conduct politics well and some badly. For when we have studied these questions, we will perhaps grasp better what sort of political system is best, how each political system should be organized so as to be best, and what habits and laws it should follow. And I do think that, yes, this is the end of the summary. I hope that you've been able to learn something. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And I'm going to see you the next time. So, bye-bye.